A bright young attorney named Abe Dabela is found dead in his overturned car with a bullet wound to the back of his head.
And within hours, they're willing to call that a suicide.
The surprisingly quick and baffling finding shocks Abe's already heartbroken loved ones.
Somebody killed my son. He didn't kill himself.
It was just such an outrageous conclusion to come to.
I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it.
And now the suicide ruling is being called a suspicious rush to judgment in a sensational federal lawsuit filed by Abe's family, accusing police of conspiring to cover up a murder.
Are they trying to protect somebody? Do they know what happened here? What's the reason that they need this to be a suicide and not a murder?
Abe's parents have trouble even talking about his death without fighting back tears.
And he brought one of the great happinesses to my life.
Abe was the Dabela's only son, born and raised in Maryland after Dad Abraham, a doctor, and Mom Ellen had immigrated to the U.S. from Ethiopia.
He was typical American kid.
Who would exceed his parents' loftiest American dreams for him.
And I think in the second grade, he was identified as gifted and talented. And he has to be sent to special classes for this group of people.
Abe would go on to win a full college scholarship and earn 3 degrees, one of them in law, which his father says has always been his natural calling.
Talking and talking and talking, that was one of his gifts in his life.
The ambitious rookie attorney trained and worked with several major law firms. But at age 32, Abe decided to open his own private law practice in the well-to-do suburb community of Redding, Connecticut.
He printed his business card. He sent it to me, and I was bragging to my physician friends.
And Abe seemed to be well-liked by those who had gotten to know him in Redding.
There's something special about him, so you couldn't ignore him.
Very nice guy, easy to talk to, smart, just an all-around decent guy.
Who liked to spark up stimulating conversation at his favorite watering holes.
He was an argumentative dude. In a spirited way. He just liked sort of debating things.
Politically, we're on 2 different sides, and I had a great time bantering back and forth of his views and my views, but all good.
But Abe's mother says he began to feel unwelcome by others in the mostly white community.
And he said to me, Mommy, there are some people who are saying that a black man, a lawyer, and he's English. He's just, where did he come from?
He told you that?
Yes, I said, there are some people who don't like me in Redding. I said, why? Get out. I was so worried for his life.
Abe also sent a Facebook message to a friend saying he felt so uncomfortable at this bar one night that he had to leave, writing, quote, all the firehouse dudes were looking at me salty. And Abe, a passionate guns rights proponent, had reportedly ruffled some powerful feathers by accusing the local police department of violating the Second Amendment.
He was what some police officers would call a troublemaker.
Why?
The police didn't want to give him a license to carry a concealed pistol. They made him jump through hoops that they didn't make other people jump through. We know that for a fact.
Abe's law practice also focused on unfair property taxes, putting him at odds with city officials, one of whom he reportedly got into a heated argument with just days before the young lawyer's death.
We know that he was at a bar. We know that there was some sort of confrontation of some sort.
And after 3 years in Redding, the good-looking, outgoing attorney appeared to be making more enemies than friends.
Abe was educated, intelligent, successful, and he was willing to speak his mind. Sometimes that can be a bad mix as far as some people are concerned.
But could someone have disliked Abe enough to kill him?
I do know that somebody like Abe can be intimidating, and I think that that alone could make somebody like Abe a target.
And less than 2 hours before he would die under suspicious circumstances, Abe reportedly received a foreboding text message.
Talk to me about the text message.
Shortly after midnight, Abe received a text message that said something along the lines of, turn, he just didn't.
It was a Friday night in Redding, Connecticut, and Abe Dabela was out bar hopping, happily mingling with friends and handing out business cards for his law practice, which wasn't unusual for the gregarious young attorney.
He was a guy who just liked to live life and, had a good time.
Around 1 a.m. at his final watering hole of the evening, Abe was in good spirits.
He was actually looking for a few people to go out and continue his partying ways after he left here.
Elo Cavecchia is the owner of the Black Cat Grill, where Abe would drink the last beer of his life.
I remember sitting right by the door, and he said, "Hey, have a great night. We'll see you, see you tomorrow."
But for Abe, there would be no tomorrow.
I was probably one of the last people to actually talk to him.
Abe then drove his Mercedes off into the night, never to be seen alive again. A short time later, around 1:30 a.m., police would find Abe's car overturned in a ditch by the side of the road less than 2 miles from his house.
How was he essentially pulled out of the car?
They just got there and pulled him out and then pronounced him dead right then on the scene.
From a single gunshot that left 2 wounds in Abe's head, one in the back and one in the side. And within hours, around 7 a.m. that Saturday morning, before an autopsy or investigation could even be conducted, Redding police issued a press release reading, quote, "It does not appear that anyone else was involved and that the gunshot wound was self-inflicted."
The most shocking thing to me is how quickly and how unequivocally this was ruled a suicide. When a person is found with his car in a ditch and a bullet in his head, how is that not going to be investigated as a crime?
Just as surprising, police made the announcement before even informing Abe's family, who learned the tragic news in a phone call from his landlady.
She says, Abe is dead. He's dead. Single car accident roll over.
So you thought at that time it was just a car accident?
Exactly.
You didn't know anything about a gunshot?
No.
Dr. Dabela says he had called the police and was told his son had died in a car crash. But the family wouldn't find out Abe had been shot dead until he was told by the medical examiner, and only learned it was suicide from the news.
And what did you say to that?
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I never believed that the Guksa will kill himself.
Police even gave Abe's father a possible motive.
A shame.
They said to
Yes.
you that the reason for the suicide was because he was ashamed because he had a car crash.
Exactly.
And he had been drinking.
Exactly.
They also theorized that Abe might have been suffering from depression, which Dr. Dabela dismisses.
He was upbeat. He was,
He was upbeat.
yes, there's no evidence of depression. As a physician, I could detect when something is wrong, but
Did Abe have a history of mental illness or depression?
no.
Abe's friends in Redding say the same thing.
He was not depressed. Not that I could tell.
Nor did he seem depressed to bar owner Eli Cavecchia, who was speaking with Abe at the Black Cat Grill moments before his death.
He was in a great mood. No issues whatsoever.
Abe was a happy person who had a lot to live for.
Including a romantic rendezvous with his girlfriend, Lauren Drinkard, a Philadelphia attorney Abe had met when they were in grad school together.
Abe and I were supposed to meet in Boston that same Sunday.
But Lauren didn't know why Abe wasn't there to meet her and not responding to her text and phone calls.
So I just instinctively knew something was awry.
Lauren was still waiting for Abe in Boston when she called a mutual friend, trying to learn why he hadn't turned up.
He just got really quiet and said, "Has anybody called you yet?" And I said, "No." And, and so he told me that Abe had passed away.
And her shock and heartbreak turned to anger when she heard police were calling Abe's death a suicide.
For them to offer that conclusion is outrageous, and that was the first red flag, that they didn't know who they were talking about, and they didn't know what they were talking about.
The NAACP thought so too, opening its own investigation of a possible hate crime.
And I think that all of you, will sleep better at night knowing what really happened here.
And when the Reading Police Department completed its investigation of Abe's death and issued an official report standing by its initial finding of suicide, friends, loved ones, and others cried, "Foul play."
Their belief is, had Abe not been an African American in this small, predominantly white town, the police department would have conducted a thorough investigation.
I wholeheartedly believe that this is a part of a police cover-up.
Somebody killed my son.
It just absolutely was not adding up. Shortly after midnight, Abe received a text message that said something along the lines of, "Turn, he just didn't."
What exactly did that message mean? Turn, he just didn't? It baffled everyone, but eerily, less than 2 hours later, at a sharp turn on the road leading to his home, Abe would be found shot dead in his overturned car. But it's unlikely anyone will ever know if that eerie text message had anything to do with his death.
But we do know that it was deleted from his phone while it was in police custody.
And that's just one of many serious allegations in a civil lawsuit filed by Abe's family, accusing the Reading Police Department of conspiring to cover up Abe's murder by declaring it a suicide.
We're alleging that the police knew that this was going to happen beforehand, and obviously whoever committed this horrible murder most likely knew that the police would quickly call this a suicide.
That's a serious allegation to make against a police department with no record of any previous misconduct. But Solomon Radner, a defense attorney who specializes in civil rights and police misconduct cases, was so outraged by the circumstances surrounding Abe's death that he even agreed to file the lawsuit on behalf of the Dabela family pro bono.
When I was looking at this evidence and I'm reading through the reports and I'm reading through the witness statements, it just absolutely was not adding up.
In fact, Radner says evidence uncovered by the police themselves actually makes a stronger case for murder than suicide.
There's no question in my mind that they failed to conduct a proper investigation. The question is why and what they knew and when they knew it.
As well as that mysterious text message. Radner says he has a team of investigators also trying to learn if there is any connection between Abe's death and a motorist who called 911 to report seeing his overturned car, but then hung up without leaving a name and reportedly never stopped to help.
It just sounds suspicious.
Then again, Radner says almost everything about the case is suspicious.
Was there a suicide note?
There was no suicide note. There was absolutely no sign, no evidence whatsoever that this was a suicide.
But Radner says there is plenty of evidence that it wasn't. Exhibit 1, the gunshot wounds. Abe was found dead from a single gunshot that left 2 wounds in the back of his head, one behind each ear. Police say the bullet entered on the left side, but Abe was right-handed. So Radner asks why Abe didn't shoot himself in the right side of the head.
It's just common sense.
Others have found that odd too.
Guy in an upside-down wrecked car, then grabs a gun and then reaches around this way. I don't know, I just never heard of that.
Exhibit 2, the gun.
Was Abe's DNA found on the trigger?
Very good question. In fact, Abe's DNA was not found on the trigger. But there's DNA on the trigger that does not match Abe. It probably matches the shooter.
Just as shocking, none of Abe's blood and DNA was found on the bullet police say killed him.
It has no blood on it, it has nothing on it that would suggest it went through somebody's head. Claiming that a bullet went through somebody's head and stayed at the scene for 4 days and has absolutely no trace of DNA on it borders on the absurd.
Radner claims it's not the bullet that killed Abe, and it wasn't until 4 days after Abe died that the bullet was found on the ground at the scene of the car crash.
Why wasn't it found day 1, day 2, day 3? Finally, day 4, they go back and find this bullet. Now, I don't know if they put it there. I don't know if it was planted. I would certainly hope not. But given the facts and circumstances surrounding this so-called investigation, I wouldn't put it past them.
Then there's the mystery of the bullet hole in the driver's seat. Police fired Abe's gun into the front passenger seat to try to get a match, but they couldn't replicate it, suggesting Abe may have been shot with another gun.
And that's in their own reports.
Exhibit 3, hair and a footprint. 2 clues were left at the scene of Abe's death. The first, hair found on the passenger side window of the overturned car.
Was that hair ever tested?
It was never tested for anybody. It was never checked.
The second clue, a muddy footprint found on the back of the jacket Abe was wearing.
Do you think that maybe one of the investigators or one of the first responders or someone there, it could have accidentally happened?
The likelihood of a first responder accidentally stepping on a dead person, I think, is about as absurd as the conclusion that this was suicide.
Radner says both the footprint and the hair could be those of Abe's killer. Anatomy of a murder. Considering all the evidence, Radner believes Abe was shot in the head by another motorist while he was driving home.
What is your theory on what happened?
Most likely what happened was somebody was next to him, shot him through his window, which is why the window shattered. His car then flipped off the road and ended up in a ditch. The killer then went to the scene, left footprints, such as his jacket, retrieved that bullet, and this person then shot Abe's gun so that a bullet would be found.
But Reading Police Chief Doug Fuchs denies every accusation in the lawsuit and stands by the official finding. It does not appear that anyone else was involved and that the gunshot wound was self-inflicted.
There was every indication that nobody else was in the vehicle and that everything that took place within that vehicle.
So the Office of the State's Attorney is taking over the investigation at this point, and they're hoping to release their findings soon.
Now Abe's friends and family can only hope they will learn the truth in court, whatever that is.
When you have something like this happen, there's a second level of injustice that goes on. The first level of injustice happened to Abe. And the second level of injustice happened to everybody who Abe left behind, who loved Abe.
Do you feel justice will ever come for Abe?
If you have a just land, yes.
Now, in response to our story, the state's attorney in Danbury tells us in part, although the investigation is not yet complete, it has revealed no evidence of any conspiracy on the part of the Reading Police Department. If the matter is determined to be a homicide, further action will be necessary. We also contacted the Reading Police Department, which sent us an 8-page response that said, in part, it is important to restate that this department has opened its books and investigative materials to any and all entities whom were engaged by the victim's family, and we will willingly continue to do so.